My guest is Marybeth Whalen. Marybeth is a writer whose several works focus here in Brunswick County. Marybeth, we're glad you're here.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Tell us how one becomes a writer. How did you become a writer?
I became a writer. That's the way I came into this world. It's something that I have done since I was old enough to hold a pen or a pencil and write little girl stories and dream up worlds that took me away my imagination.
Okay.
And were inspired by, I was always a big reader. I think that's a huge part of how one becomes a writer is reading. And I was always a big reader.
I'm getting ahead of the story. I know that you have 4 books. You've written one each year for the last several years. Tell us about those books, and I know at least several of them are set here in Brunswick County.
They sure are, yes. My very first novel was The Mailbox, and it's based on the real mailbox that sits on Bird Island at Sunset Beach. And it actually was an idea that kind of occurred to me out of the blue as I had visited the mailbox with my husband, and we were walking home back to our beach house, and I said, you know what would be a great idea is if somebody wrapped a love story around that mailbox as kind of a connection point between 2 people. And my husband, who had heard 1,000 book ideas in our marriage, stopped dead in his tracks and looked at me and said, now, if you don't write that one, you're crazy. And I remember thinking, okay, I really might be onto something. And so actually that very summer, I started writing that novel and wrote it pretty quickly, and that became my first novel, and that's The Mailbox. And then the other 2 that are set in the Sunset Beach area is the guest book, and that was last year's book that came out last summer. And then I have one this summer called The Wishing Tree.
All right. Those of us who live here in Brunswick County are delighted that your books are here, but how did you get interested in Brunswick County?
Well, I'm from Charlotte, and
Okay.
so it's a pretty easy drive down here, about 3.5 hours. I know it well by now. And when I was 15 years old, a good friend invited me to come to the beach with her family, and I spent a week here and just fell in love with the place and made a little resolve in my 15-year-old heart that when I was old enough and had my own family, I would bring them back here, and I have.
You're an adopted Brunswick Countian.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah,
Right.
It's where my heart lives.
Sure.
That's for sure.
I know you have a large family, and I'll ask you a couple of questions. How do you find time to write? And tell us a little bit about your family as well.
Well, I have 6 children. They range in age from 21 down to 8, and so it's a crazy life. It is hard sometimes to find the time, but I think if you're passionate and you're committed, you will find the time, whether it means getting up a little earlier or staying up a little later, or just taking that 15 minutes at your lunch break or when the kids are not doing something and committing, I'm going to make this a priority every day.
Do you keep a laptop or an iPad or something close by?
I do. I keep my laptop open at all times.
Other writers have told me that they actually capture thoughts in the middle of the night or anywhere, and that they try to write it down quickly before it goes away. Is that true for you?
Oh, for sure. I have paper in my purse, my car, in my nightstand drawer, notebooks that I keep constantly with ideas for future books, and that's just something that you do. You have to get it down because you will not remember if you're like me.
Okay. A good writer has a great imagination, right?
True.
How do you develop a character or series of characters? How do you come up with them?
For me, they kind of just show up. And I know that sounds a little hocus pocus.
I can
but
understand that.
They do. They kind of just show up and start talking. And the trick is paying attention and letting them continue to talk and letting them develop and giving them time to develop. That's the one thing I'm learning the most, is that I can't just right out of the gate start writing a character. I've got to give it time and listen to who they are and what they want and really dig deep before I'm ready to
Well, I like
tell
the
the
2
story.
words you just said. You have to pay attention.
Yeah, for sure.
Tell me a little more about that.
Well, it's easy in the rush of life to get distracted and to let the noise of life and the busyness of life ebb away at your attention and your creativity. And so for me, it's learning to capture those thoughts and, as you said, get them down and preserve them and listen to them and make sure that they are important in your life.
Yeah, that's pretty nifty. You mentioned that 3 of your books are set here in Brunswick County?
Yes.
But 1 is not. Tell us a little bit about the setting there.
That one's actually in my hometown in Charlotte. It's much more of a suburban kind of desperate housewives, real housewives of Charlotte, North Carolina, kind of story. It's much more peeking in their windows and seeing what's really going on behind those perfect neighborhood facades. And so that's called She Makes It Look Easy. And that was a fun one to do.
How would you, in general terms, how would you describe the fiction that you write? Of what genre or class?
Women's fiction. I think some of my books, especially the first one, The Mailbox, tends to be a little more romantic in tone, but definitely my sweet spot where I like to live is kind of the conflicting emotions of a woman, whether that's as a mom or a wife or a friend or a daughter, a sister, those different relationships that women are living out every day, and just digging into those and seeing what's going on in the minds and hearts of women. So,
do you begin with the end in mind, or does the novel work its way through sequentially and naturally?
I always have the end in mind.
Okay.
I do, and actually, most of my books I've written when I've written the first draft and I've written that last line, it has stayed exactly as I wrote it. It never changed through all the edits or anything. The last line's always pretty much been exactly what I said. And it's been funny because when I wrote the last line of my newest, The Wishing Tree, I was not really necessarily intending to end at that scene. And when I wrote that line, I was like, well, that's the end. And that was
Good.
kind of a neat, fun thing to happen. That's never happened before.
Yeah. Once you finish a first draft, do you have others that will read your drafts, or do you work on all of those issues yourself?
Now that I'm under contract and kind of writing on a tight time frame, typically my editor is my reader. So that's kind of how it's worked thus far. So.
Okay, you just mentioned time frame, and
Yeah.
that causes me to ask you another question. Are you bound to a tight time frame? And what is your time frame for
well,
writing
with doing
a
a book a year, it's been kind of a quick pace that I've been producing at since the first book came out. So, I mean, I love it. I don't really know now how to function without a contract and a deadline.
I see.
I do best with that.
You're one of those folks that
Yeah.
work well
Under
with
the
deadlines.
gun. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I understand that. Tell us about your latest book, which is called The Wishing Tree.
Well, it's a story about Ivy Marshall, who is happily living her life in Asheville, North Carolina, when her sister is proposed to on national television on kind of a Good Morning America type show one morning, and she's happy for her sister until she finds out on that same day that her husband is cheating on her, and throws her into a tailspin, as you can imagine. And it starts a series of events that winds her up at sunset, where her sister's wedding is going to be held.
Okay.
And her mom, who is trying to help, puts her in charge of some jobs to get ready for the wedding. And one of the jobs she's put in charge of is the wishing tree for the wedding, which is actually a custom that is a tree that it's basically branches in a pot, to be honest. Guests can come and hang tags that they've written wishes for the couple. And it usually is at the reception. And she's put in charge of this. And the story is basically about the wishes that we go into marriage with versus the realities that we find when we're there.
And you've saved the ending so that our viewers can get the book, right?
Yeah.
Right?
So, trust me, what I told you is like the first chapter of the
Okay,
book. It's
good.
very quick.
We talked a little bit about this before we went on the air. And that is whether writing is difficult, whether it's challenging, whether you write in small bits or large spurts. How do you write, and how difficult is it?
How do I write? Well, for me, I have learned, I think every writer has to find their sweet spot, and that's different for every single writer I've ever talked to. For me, that's 1,000 words a day. That's not too hard. It's not too easy. It's just enough. And at 1,000 words a day, if your average novel is about anywhere from 80 to 90,000 words, typically, that's typical, you can write a first draft at that rate in about 3 months. And so I've kind of learned how I can do that and pace myself, and I'm very, very disciplined about meeting that word count every day, especially, obviously, when I'm under a deadline.
I bet you are.
Yeah. So I've learned how to make it work.
Do you have plans to do a book a year for years to
I hope
come?
so. I would love to. I would love
Okay.
to. I have several more Sunset Beach, kind of love story women's fiction ideas that I'd still love to do.
Do you hear from some of your readers?
Oh, for sure, for sure. Some of the most fun has been the mailbox, the original one, is people that have actually come, read the book, come here and made the trek out.
I see.
Girlfriends doing, girlfriend weekends, and
Sure.
they all read the book and then they come. And that's always so rewarding to think that, people discovered this treasure because they found the book. And that's always so fun to read,
Right.
get those emails.
Marybeth Whalen, you've had a great deal of success already. We wish you even more success in the future. And
Thank you.
Thank you for being
Great.
with us.
Thanks for
It's been
having me.
fun. Thanks.